So my check engine light came on the other day on the F-type, and when I checked it, we had some codes for an O2 sensor. I'm going to go over that process right now on what codes we got and how to hook up. So what you're going to need to do this, you're actually going to need some sort of ODB2 device, such as this here. So it's going to have this connector on it, and that connector on the F-type is located slightly above and to the side of the hood release. So there's your hood release, there's your ODB2 connector. So we're going to connect our ODB2 with the car in the off position. Just like that there. Just pop the connector in. So at this point, we're going to just turn the car on. So that's foot off the brake and press the start stop button. So once you've done that, your cluster should be all lit up. So at this point, your ODB2 tester should be powered up, unless it has a separate power button. But now that we're in here, we're going to go ahead and select our ODB2. So we're going to go ahead and erase our previous data for and this is all proprietary to the device that you're using, the Syntec. I'm going to do that so I can save these if I wish. So here's what I have. I've got two modules here that I'm going to look at. So I'm going to look at the codes from this one. Here's our code, P0050, lets us know that the heat control circuit for bank 2, sensor 1, is showed to fail. We've also got the sensor circuit bank 2, sensor 1, so once again the same sensor. And then here we have sensor reference voltage circuit open bank sensor 1, or bank 2, sensor 1. So all three of these codes are bank 2, sensor 1. So that's going to be your pre-catalytic converter sensor. It's going to be the one that's closest to the engine. And these actually have 3 O2 sensors in them, and we'll show you those here in a minute. So that's our codes that we have. So we know it's bank 2, sensor 1. So I'm back at our codes, and I'm going to go ahead and erase them. So it's letting me know that if I erase it, all the data on this is going to be gone. I'm fine with that because I want to get it cleared, so when I start it back up with the new sensor in here, we'll know if it's still got a problem. We're going to go to our 7E9. We're going to read codes here. We'll look at our stored codes. It says we have no codes. So now that the codes are erased, we're simply going to power the car off completely. There we go. Now we've shut the car down. Now it's time to go ahead and just unplug our ODB2 tool. At this point, we can change our O2 sensor. So on our O2 sensor, as I mentioned before, this car has 3 O2 sensors per catalytic converter. So this being a V8, we have 2 catalytic converters, so that gives us 6 total O2s. And this one that we're looking at right now, right here at the joint of where the catalytic converter joins the manifold, that is O2 sensor number 1. And this being on the driver's side, in America, this is going to be our O2 bank 2. Because when they design these and they write the software for these, they do this in British thought, so the driver would be on the right side of the car. So the right side of the engine from the driver's seat would be bank 1, and the passenger side would be bank 2. So here in the US, with left-hand drive cars, the driver's side is technically bank 2. So here we are, like I said, O2 number 1. Then you have one on the more on the engine side, or the inner side of the cat. That's going to be number 2, which is the sensor that is checking what's going on with the cat at the time of the conversion of the gases. And then you have your third, which is going to be just a little ways past your catalytic converter, here right before it gets to the, not really an H pipe, but where it gets connected together. And then you do have an X pipe just a little further down. So that's going to be number 3. And then you have the same thing on the passenger side, O2 number 1, O2 number 2, and then O2 number 3 at the back. And that would be bank 1 on the right side of the vehicle, bank 2 on the left side of the vehicle. Hopefully you can see that, but that gray wire there, that is from the O2 number 1 that we're going to be replacing. Now it comes out and it goes back down the side of the transmission. As you can see it here, it kind of goes in between a set of hoses, and it slides down here, and that's the connector for it right there, actually on the bottom side of the transmission. So that's where we've got to get that cable unrouted from. It looks like you can kind of slide it more towards the hoses and slip your connector out through this little hole here and get it back around on this side, so it's a little easier to get around. So you don't have to undo these steel hoses just to get that connector out. It looks like there's a good gap here. Pop that plug loose. You just have to push that little back side of that tab there on the right, and then you can pop the socket out. And then we have, hopefully y'all can see this, yeah, right there, that little plastic tab that snapped over. And then we've got another one right above that second O2. You can see that gray wire that goes up, and then it snaps into another one of those. So you got to get those popped loose so you can get the wires loose. So there we are, got the clip loose. So I just used a long flat bladed screwdriver to just kind of catch it on the edge there and pop it past that little hook over. Once I did that, you just kind of slide the cable out from behind the hook, and then definitely had to use the long one to get up to that one up top. And it's hard to kind of see it from here now that the cable's loosened in front of it. But once you get that pop loose, there you go. So here we are with our O2 sensor socket on. And this is a special socket that has a lobe to it, almost like a cam. So what it does is allow it to slide over the actual O2 sensor, and then the connection for the wrench is offset. And this one here in a really tight place, as you can see. But what I've found in the past with many cars is if it's really tight like this, you might be able to use like a drive and just set it on the side of the socket and give it a couple of good taps with the hammer and bust it loose. And then you should be able to spin it out by hand, hopefully, assuming it's not all rusted in. This one being as new as it is, hopefully that's where we're going to be. So that's what I'm going to do on this one with it being such a narrow fit. I'm just going to catch an awl or something like that on the edge of that lobe as far out as I can to try to get as much leverage as I can and give it some good taps. Definitely not going to beat on it hard, but we're going to give it some good taps to try to bust that loose. Catching the socket with a long rod and then tapping it with the hammer was enough to get it pop loose. Usually once you get past the crush washer part of the O2 sensor, it loosens up. Like I said, unless it's got some really nasty rust, it should come out pretty easy once you get that broken loose. And just a small ball peen hammer is what I was using, and it was enough to give it a few good little taps, and it rotated around about 1/8 to 1/4 of a turn, and then it was loose enough that I can actually turn it with my hand now. Here's our new one, getting ready to go back in. There's our old one. As I was saying, they have a crush washer right here close to the nut. So when you tighten that down, that should crush a little bit to help seal the exhaust gases into the manifold. It's not bad looking. I don't see a bunch of gunk built up into the ports to where it takes the gases in to sense. The wire itself looks alright. So simply from the readings, it sounds like the internals of the O2 sensor here, the heater probably failed. Here's a new one. Of course they come with a cap because they don't want you getting a bunch of debris and whatnot into those little orifices so that the O2 sensor will work properly. I always find it best, especially when I'm not getting an OEM, to double check, make sure our pins are the same. It looks like they are. The connector's the same. Nothing's really different there. So this is a Denso, and as I said, this is probe number 1. There's all the information on it. So the originals are Bosch from everything I've read, and it does say, there we go, there's the actual numbers on this O2 sensor. This is the original. It is from Germany, so probably was a Bosch. It doesn't actually have a Bosch stamp on it that I can find. I'd believe that it's a Bosch, especially with it being from Germany. Probably reference that number with Bosch's website, and you'd probably find out that yeah, it is a Bosch. But when I checked for a Bosch for my car, they are nowhere to be found, and where I did find them, they were an exuberant price. So I did find a Denso that was a much better price. I believe this was just under $200, about 160, 170. So not too terrible price. A factory one's going to run you somewhere around the $400 to $600 range, I believe it is, if you buy it straight from Jag. Now, other than the keeping debris out with this cap, they're also protecting the threads, because they do have some coating on the threads to keep it from seizing. It's just an anti-seize grease, so be sure and try not to wipe that off as you're going back on. You do want that stuff in the threads, so the next person that has to pull it out, hopefully it's not you, it will be sealed and easy to come out. Here are the tools I use to do the O2 sensor. So as I said, it's kind of a light to medium ball peen hammer. The specialty tool you'll have to have is the actual O2 sensor socket. These you can pick up just about anywhere, any tool store. But as you see, like I said, it has kind of a cam shape to it, to where your wrench is supposed to be offset from the O2 sensor. And you can see this one's been used quite a few times as a tapping tool. But you get a good strong one, you can do that kind of stuff with it and still be able to use your ratchet on it. But it comes in handy to be able to do it that way, because many O2 sensors wind up being in a very tight location. And this rod, so it's right at 2 foot long, and that's what enabled me to kind of slide in to that opening and get it in there. It's about as big around as my pinky, maybe a little bigger. That enabled me to keep from having to figure out a way to get a ratchet in there. Our O2 sensor is completely back in place. Much of the video you saw the plastic coverings were off. That's because I was doing an oil change at the same time. So you don't necessarily have to have those plates off to get that job done. You can get to just about everywhere you need to without it. Maybe just the back plate would all you'd need off to be able to get up through an opening here by the power steering. That'll get you that opening there. But other than that, when I went back on, once again I used the O2 sensor special tool, and I used a tap instead of a wrench. So I don't know my exact torque, but got it all the way down and then tightened it as tight as I could with my hand. Then got it in position and tapped it once again, just like I did coming off. And just gave it a couple of good taps until it felt like it turned about another 1/8 to 1/4 of a turn.